to the ocean, take me to the sea. Wash away my worries, let my soul be free. Take me to the ocean, take me to the sea. Wash away my worries, let my soul be free.
Hello world, I'm Max. Back in IRL, I go by Curtis. Welcome to another episode of the State Copy Podcast. As always, I'll remind you to review episode 0 and its appended segments for terms, conditions, and disclosures applicable to the entirety of this content. Thank you. Hey everybody. Quick setup for today's show. Our guest today is Jim Egelston. Jim is a retired FBI special agent. We spend a good portion of today's show going over his incredible background and his story. This was a really fun conversation. I always enjoy talking to Jim. He's sort of family through marriage, I'll say. He has just kind of in my career, which is mostly computer science, I don't have a lot of exposure to people like Jim, and so I've always really enjoyed his stories from his 30 years or so with the FBI, and I think you will too. If you have questions or comments, they're open. Please post them, and Jim and I will get back to you on that. Also, there's a little Easter egg at the end of the show where I give Jim kind of an overview of how I'm using all of this rich content that I'm creating by convincing my friends to join me to be very public and sharing themselves. If any of that interests you, please stick around. I tried to make it sort of geared towards a layman audience, you don't need a computer science degree to follow the conversation, I don't think, and it does just a quick overview of some stuff. Also, I will read out at the end all of what my model responded to as the meaning of life and the universe and all that. It's kind of fun to read it. Thank you. Oh, very importantly, a lot of what I wanted to do in this setup is do a proper plug for Jim. I don't do much marketing of my content. I'm just happy to be a part of these conversations, but I really want to do a thorough job when people who come on my show to advertise their services. Jim's a private investigator now, and for anybody in the Phoenix, the Valley area in Arizona, if you have need of a private detective, Jim's your guy. And his website is baseline-investigations.com, and I'll post that link in the description of this video. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. I think you'll really enjoy it. All right, let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the State Copy Podcast. Today's guest is Jim Egelston. Jim, I'm going to totally mess up the telling of your title and all of that in work.
Yeah, that's fine.
Could you, first of all, as always, State Copy Podcast is about the rich telling of everybody's story. And so Jim has a really fucking cool one.
I don't know about that.
I think so.
We'll see.
Wait till you hear. And so, first of all, what was your title at the FBI?
I was a special agent for 27 years, and for 5 years I was a supervisory special agent.
Okay. And what does that mean?
So a special agent is a sworn law enforcement officer authorized to investigate crimes, that fall under United States jurisdiction, United States legal code.
Right.
And as a supervisor, I supervised at headquarters. I supervised a couple of different programs, which was a very interesting experience. And then in the field, I supervised a squad. I was the supervisor over the domestic terrorism squad here in Phoenix for a while.
See, that's really exciting. All right. Well, I'm really going to want to dig into that progression of your professional career, and I have a lot of questions for you about sort of psychological and philosophical in nature of just experiencing being that. I mean, I told you about a TV series called True Detectives with Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey.
I never did find that. I looked for it after you gave me the title, but I'll have to dig deeper, I guess.
I'll have to find it for you. But yeah, this is who I'm picturing. So we'll talk a little bit about that story later, and or when we get to that point. But I really want to get to sort of, like early on, like your well, and just a quick bit of background that I should build in the connection between me and Jim is my girlfriend's sister is married to Jim. And so lots of family.
And I'm very happy that she is.
yes. Me too.
So,
I like your wife.
Yeah.
It's so we've spent a lot of time talking with each other over Thanksgivings and etc. All these events over the years, and it's always a great conversation.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I feel the same way. Even though we see a lot of things differently, I enjoy being able to sit down with somebody and have a respectful discussion and dig deep into topics that I find interesting and learn things and share opinions and whatever. So
it's mutual. Yeah. So this should be good. So let's start at the beginning. Wherever you think's appropriate for like sort of the beginning of your story, pick an entry of, and so a logical one is like, I just graduated high school. What now? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, so, if you wanted me to really kind of cover why I got into law enforcement in the first place.
Yeah. That's why I'm going back that far and maybe back further as necessary.
It goes really back for me to my earliest memories of childhood, like tricycle days. I can remember always playing on the driveway with my friends from the neighborhood.
You were the cop.
I was the cop or the fireman. Or the fireman. And that's the thing is, I don't know where that came from. Maybe watching television shows. Because it wasn't even so much good guys, bad guys. It wasn't like that. It was like we were all on the same team. Yeah. We were riding our little tricycles and graduated to bicycles with training wheels later. And we were just riding around in the driveway going, woo, 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 making a siren noise.
Yeah, I was a kid too. I remember that.
And it was so
I can't remember if I was a cop or a robber or a mix of both. I don't know. But you were the cop.
Well, it was one of the things I identified with, being a policeman or a fireman.
Okay.
And again, I don't know where that came from. Growing up, my dad had a lot of health problems, unfortunately. He was sick a lot of the time. My memories of he was a great dad, but my memories of him were he was in the hospital a lot. He had to go to the emergency room with heart problems, whatever. And unfortunately, he passed away when I was 11. Well, things happen for a reason. So I don't know why my dad passed away when I was 11, but I was very fortunate. 2 doors down from where I lived on one side, there was a captain from the Illinois State Police. And 2 doors down on the other side, there was a lieutenant from the fire department in the city where I grew up. And they were both great guys. It's all
starting to fit together, Jim.
Right. So I already had an interest in both those things.
Yeah.
And, so now I'm older. So my dad passed away when I'm 11, and then getting into high school and actually elementary school, I used to stop off at the fire station on my way home from school, walking home.
Could you move that mic just a little closer?
Yep. The Lieutenant Fox, Carl Fox was his name, would let me come into the station and help clean the trucks and go up to the top of the tower and hook the hose up so it would dry. I mean, he was really good to me and a really good role model, a really good influence. And like I say, 2 doors down on the other side, Richard Kozak was a captain in the Illinois State Police. He had been in their drug unit. He had gone up through the ranks, obviously, being a captain. He had kids that were my age that I went to school with and wound up being buddies with one of his kids.
Yeah.
And we used to, as I got older, we used to lift weights together and all that. Well, Mr. Kozak and a couple of guys who were Chicago police officers had a business on the side where they did security. And one summer, I think it was the summer that I was graduating high school, he got a contract at the hotel next to what used to be the Rosemont Horizon. I think it's now called the Allstate Arena. It's where the DePaul Blue Demons played basketball, rock concerts, tractor pulls. When the circus came to town, that's where they would be.
What city again?
Rosemont, Illinois.
Rosemont, Illinois.
Right.
Got it.
And it's still an active arena, but I don't know what it's called right now. Well, anyway, he asked me if I wanted a part-time job working security at the hotel. Yeah. And it wasn't really the hotel security, it was parking for events. But we used the hotel parking lot to park cars for the events and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, almost all the guys that I worked with in that capacity were off-duty cops. And they all had funny stories, and they all, seemed to get along. And just, I guess it pulled me in that direction a little bit more than the fire service would have.
Right.
And anyway, so very positive influence in that regard. Wound up deciding that I wanted a career in law enforcement. By default, I got a degree in economics in college. Mm-hmm. And that's funny because my worst subject is math. And, once they got into
economics is a lot of other stuff.
It is. It's a lot of psychology, actually.
It's a lot of psychology.
And my minor in college was psych. So,
okay.
So that's what kind of interested me in econ. In the first, macroeconomics is a lot of psychology, like consumer psychology and whatnot. But when you get into derivative equations, man,
we got computers for that now.
Now they do. They didn't have many computers back in the day. So anyway, got my degree, and it was Mr. Kozak, who I kept talking to him about getting into law enforcement. And again, a very, very kind guy to take time to kind of mentor me and take me under his wing and be a good influence. And
I love those kind of people. That came up in my last pod I did with Nasser Al-Salam. These people these mentors that just kind of start really, you can tell they're enjoying sharing knowledge that helped them.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when you're done, there's a point in life where you recognize these mentors and you're just like, holy shit, that forged my whole life.
Right. It did. It really did.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it, maybe it did change, but definitely influenced my life and in a very positive way.
Yeah.
And I've got to say too, along the way, I mean, I'm the youngest of the 3 siblings that I grew up with. My brother's like 13 years older than I am. My sister's 10 years older. When my dad passed away, they were both already married, out of the house, had their own life. But his death actually brought us closer together. And they were also both great influences in my life by, kind of taking me under their wing. I mean, 11-year-old kid at home by himself, because mom had to work full time to pay the bills. I could have gone a lot of different directions. Looking back, I especially now really appreciate how many positive, good influences I had in my life. And I never wanted to disappoint my mom. So I always, I would kind of catch myself and be like, maybe I don't want to hang out with those guys. They're going to get in trouble. I don't want to disappoint my mom. I don't want her to be disappointed in me.
Sure.
So anyway, a lot of good people kept me on a good path and gave me great suggestions in life. And that's kind of how I gravitated toward law enforcement in general. So Mr. Kozak was the one day at his kitchen table talking about, gee, which police department should I apply for and which ones should I avoid and all of that. He suggested federal law enforcement. He said, you've got your college degree. He said, if you want to start out with local,
swing for the fences.
Yeah. He said,
young
why
man,
don't you go for FBI or something like that? And anyway, so moving forward, the first wave of applications where I applied for police departments, I don't think I made a list for any of them. And I think it was just because I was still very young needed to mature and grow up a little bit.
Sure.
And I was in banking, having gotten a degree in economics. That made sense. So I wound up working in banking and finance for about 7 years. And in my mid to late 20s, I kind of decided, I really want to be in law enforcement. It was interesting watching the interview with your cousin the other day. I watched your podcast with your cousin. I was telling you I identified with a lot of the things he said.
Did you watch the first one we did or the second one?
I think it was the first
one. Got it. Okay.
Where he was talking about living in Japan, but in the rural area. And all that. Yeah, very interesting. And he's a Mandarin speaker, so so
it's just cool.
He's got that.
That's
but where was I going with this?
We were right at.
So I decided, I really want to be in law enforcement. I better try this again. And nothing wrong with being in banking. I was having a fine time doing that. But the reason, personally, for me, that I wanted to go into law enforcement was because I wanted to help people. And that's one of the things that your cousin said that I identified with.
Yeah.
I wanted to do something with my life that at the end of the day, I felt like I had tried to make, the world a better place. Now, when I say the world, I'm not unrealistic. I'm not talking about saving the world, but
that was going to be my next question for you is like how, because I think that's a noble for it to occur to you as you're young to want to help people is really cool. And but then how does that translate into helping people? Like, because some people might go be a teacher.
Absolutely.
But for you, it was actually being a professional. They're all professional.
First responder, for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know what, again, I don't really know what that was because I wouldn't consider myself daring in any way. I'm not like a big risk taker, as you know.
Right,
We've had a lot of conversations about that.
Right.
I'm not, I don't perceive myself to be an aggressive type individual.
No.
I can be assertive. There's a difference,
Yeah. I don't have, I haven't built a strong connection or friendship really with anybody else in law enforcement, so I don't really have much to compare it with. Yeah. But I don't know what picture I had going into the personality, like mainly as a lot of TV shows and stuff like that. But I would strongly agree that you are a very sort of deeply thoughtful person and not an aggressive person at all or any of that.
Right. And I was going to say, I think our conversations kind of opened your eyes to my personality, if you will, being maybe different from what you expected a cop's or an FBI agent's personality to be. And I see it as perfectly normal within the profession that I was in.
Right.
Because there certainly are guys who are aggressive. There are guys who want the action. They want to get in the bar fight. They want to get in the car. It's funny because that's not what I wanted when I was going into
de-escalate.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's.
I want to work with the guy that goes into the room and talks the situation down and calms everybody down. I don't want to be working with the guy who wants to go in swinging fists.
Right.
People get hurt doing that, and I could get hurt too. Yeah. So,
That's very logical. That would definitely be my approach if I were found myself in that situation.
Right. So anyway, that's kind of how I gravitated that way. And when I decided the second time around, I better do this before the opportunity slips away.
Yeah.
I never mean to sound boastful, but my personality had changed. My way of looking at life had changed. And I think one of the things that really helped me was believe it or not, my short career working in banking and finance, because during that progression, one of the things that I did was I served as a loan collector. And here's an interesting, I guess, bridge between how I approached that job and how I approached law enforcement. I got hired by a small savings and loan, and I was working in their loan processing department and got promoted to be a loan collector. And they dealt mainly with mortgage loans and some car loans and stuff like that. And this would have been in the late 80s. So the savings and loan crash was going on during that time. A lot of people interest rates were very high.
A lot of people were not making their payments on time.
A lot of people were not making their payments on time.
Business was good.
Yeah.
For Jim.
As a loan collector. Well, so the traditional model had been you go in and you get your delinquency list and you start writing demand letters and you make them threatening and you make them hard ass and you threaten legal action. I didn't do that. I was like, well, let me try this. And so I kind of wrote letters that said, hey, we see you've fallen behind on your payments. We don't want to see you lose your house. Can you come in and let's work out a repayment plan to get you back on track? Well, my collection rate went surpassed the other guy that I was working with.
Yeah.
And it was because I approached people the way I would want to be approached in the same situation and tried to put myself in their shoes. And, now there were certainly people who didn't respond, who, promised they were going to catch up and never did. But I thought, I just wanted to try a different approach. Oh, geez. Man. That would have been 23 to 25, maybe somewhere in that range, But that's what I mean.
That's a very mature chance that you took, because I remember myself at 23, 25. I mean, I was sure I knew everything, but I also took a lot of direction just by default. Like if somebody said, this is how you do that job, that's probably, I would have just done it.
Yeah.
And for at 23 to 25, for it to occur to you, this thing they're doing
doesn't work. Well, and that's what did happen. So I did start off copying the demand letters that I had seen, in the files. And I'm like, we're going to come get you and throw you out of your house. And I'm like, this is not working. Let me change tack
Also, I feel like a dick.
Oh, yeah. There was that. There was that, Right.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times it's not necessarily what you say. It's how you say it to somebody, right? I mean, that applies in life just in general. Right? So anyway, I obviously learned and matured. And a lot of that, like I say, a lot of that was from the influence that my family had, that my neighbors had, that my teachers at school had, people who were kind enough and sympathetic enough to see me as somebody that was worth their time and worth their influence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, so second time that I applied for the police departments, I scored very well, and I made high rank on lists of several different departments, and was very happy. And again, talked with my mentor, Mr. Kozak, about which of these departments are good and blah blah blah. And I wound up working for the Mount Prospect Police Department, very good agency. It was, I think, probably one of the first accredited law enforcement agencies at that time. We're talking like 1990 now.
What is an accredited law enforcement agency?
There's standards that an agency has to meet to be accredited, to be recognized as, professional standards, and different policies and procedures in place, and follow those. And
that makes sense.
Right.
Like required training for all officers,
right,
that kind of thing.
Training, mandatory training, and so I was fortunate to be hired by a good department with a good reputation, and at the same time I had applied for those police departments. I thought, why not? I'll throw in my application for the FBI and just see what happens. Never thought I'd hear from those people, right? And so I did. And because of luck, my hiring process went a lot faster than the average.
What was that day like? Did you get a letter in the mail?
Actually started.
It's the FBI.
Yeah.
Or did you get a call?
It was a phone call. And it was funny because I was already working as a police officer, and I was working midnights. I was a new guy, F&G, fucking new guy.
Yeah.
So I was an F&G officer working the midnight shift, and I would come home at, get home at like 8 a.m., go to sleep for a while, and then my then girlfriend would come over to the apartment and make dinner. And, when she got off work, she'd make dinner. Well, whatever, I can't remember the day of the week or exactly the time of day or whatever, but she woke me up and said, hey, there's a Mrs. whatever her name was, Mrs. Johnson on the phone for you. And I'm like, I'm sleeping, leave me alone. And she's like, it's Mrs. Johnson from the FBI. Would you like to take the call? Oh, of course I sprung out of bed and I'm like, hello. So I think it was that asking me to come in for the initial testing and everything, because I had sent in the application.
Yeah.
I got lucky timing wise because it was the end of the savings and loan scandal from the 1980s.
Yeah.
I had an economics degree. I had experience working in a savings and loan. I knew how they kept their records and everything else. And the Bureau was looking for agents at that time with a financial background. And it just... fate.
We're about to regulate an industry. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's
so fate...
the natural response function aligned you perfectly to demand.
It did. And so that initial phone call was just to say, hey, we've received your application. You meet our minimum requirements. Would you like to schedule the tests now to see if you're going to make it or not? So I went through that process. And again, man, I remember going downtown for my interview, and I think it was like one of the snowiest days of the year. I think we had like 14 inches of snow. I was wearing my nicest suit, my dress shoes.
Oh, yeah.
And I was soaked, by the time because I had to take the train and then walk down to the FBI office. Well, anyway.
Oh, that shows you got grit, though.
Well, it does, yeah. I don't know if they measured that, but so it was interesting because it was a 3-agent panel interview, and it's similar to the process they use now. But I think they just, one of the main lines of questioning was, tell us about your experience. Why do you want to be in law enforcement? What are you doing now? If this doesn't work out, what are your plans? And then, if I recall, the interview process consisted also of giving some scenarios, like what would you do in this situation, or give us an example maybe of how you responded to a situation like this, whatever. Well, sure. I thought I bombed. I was coming off the midnight shift. I went home, I got changed, I went downtown, I had the interview, and I thought I bombed. And so at the end of the interview, they were like, well, is there anything else you'd like to say or ask us or tell us? And I'm like, well, thank you for this opportunity. I'm sure I'll never see any of you again. This has been great. And I'll just go back and be a happy cop. And, it's kind of like that. And so I was very pleasantly surprised when I got the next letter saying, hey, you passed the interview, whatever the next step was. So,
oh, man.
It was a cool experience.
Where did they send you then? So you make it to the next stage. What? For the folks at home, we don't have a freaking clue how this works. Right. It's really exciting. It's cool to hear the stages and how it goes. So after you got through the first phase of interviews, then do you go to a training somewhere or something like that?
Right.
Or?
Yeah. And I can't remember the progression because I think the very last hurdle you had to get, literally the last hurdle you had to pass was the physical fitness test. So I think even after the interview, I may have had that one more test. And the process has changed a little bit now compared to what it was back when dinosaurs walked the earth. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, I went to Quantico, Virginia, the Marine Corps base in Quantico. The FBI Academy is built there, 16 weeks of training. That's still the...
Man, that had to be cool.
It was cool. It was very... And, that's a good point because some of my classmates, some of my colleagues, I don't know why, didn't seem to enjoy it. I thought it was amazing. I mean, just to be there was cool. In fact, when I was there, they had just released Silence of the Lambs, which was filmed.
It starts out there,
starts
right?
out at
what's her name is
Jodie Foster
jogging.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
And so that tree with the signs, pain, hurt, agony, love it, that's still there. When you go out for a jog with your instructor and he's about to kick your ass for the next hour.
Authentic.
Very authentic. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was...
Man,
it was cool.
In that moment, that was the first time that had ever been really probably shown...
probably, in that
to the mainstream audience, and you were there at that moment. That's freaking cool.
Yeah, it was cool. And so, I think, how does this apply to life? I mean, who cares about my story? Some people are interested.
I care, Jim.
Well, I appreciate that. but I mean, your audience, who cares? And some people might be interested in law enforcement, but in life, for me to pause at that moment and to really just appreciate. And man, I do get choked up because to pause at that moment and appreciate where I was. Yeah. And that it was like a childhood dream to be there, man. Like how many people get to fulfill a childhood dream of becoming what they want to be in life. It's
a cool thing.
It's cool, yeah.
With strict, like it was hard to get through that door.
They don't let anybody in there.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a process to get selected and all. So I was, but it wasn't a matter of being full of myself. It was a matter of appreciating what it took for me to get there, but also all these people that I've already talked about.
Everything they contributed.
That is what got me there.
Yeah.
If I hadn't
That's beautiful.
Yeah. If I didn't have the family that I have, if I didn't have the people in my life who took a moment to spend a little time and show a little care, might not have been there,
Oh, that's awesome.
So to me, that was like the lesson, is like, I am really going to appreciate that moment,
That is
so
profound.
yeah.
So, okay. So let's go to, you said 16 weeks.
Yep.
And that's,
Right.
PT and the really strict PT.
Yeah.
And then what's the coursework like? Like, is it psychological and historical or?
Yep. A little bit of all of the above. I forget exactly the curriculum, but there were several different subjects that we had to study from an academic standpoint.
Yeah.
So in addition to physical fitness training, and you had to be tested and pass the fitness tests during and at the end of training, firearms proficiency, of course. I think we shot like 6,000 plus rounds of handgun ammunition through training.
And is it like these tactical type courses at this point?
Yeah. I mean, of course, crawl, walk, run. So they start you off with like, here's a gun. Don't point it at anybody. Right. Don't point at anybody unless you really want to shoot them. But by the time you finish the training, you're doing more tactical exercises where you're moving and, all under very watchful eye of the instructor, of course, but moving to different positions, firing with different types of weapons, shotgun, handgun. At that time, we were using the MP5 for a carbine, a long gun type of thing, rifle.
One of my favorite guns in some video game I used to play.
Oh yeah, the MP5. The nail driver, very accurate. But the coursework it included like obviously law, just like federal law, and how. What
your authority is?
Absolutely, right.
All of that.
Right. Where does the authority derive from? What's the process to apply for and get a search warrant, an arrest warrant? Here are the elements of, so there's, I don't know how many gazillion laws under U.S. code, but we couldn't study all of them, but we studied specific laws as examples, like here's what this law says. Here's what's needed to prove that somebody has committed the elements of this crime, and then they would have
probably, and here's a whole bunch of things that if you screw up, we don't have a case. Kind of thing. Well, a lot of like procedural.
Absolutely.
Like your ducks got to be in a row.
Right. Yeah. And so they also did mock training exercises where they would hire, I don't know if they hired them or had role players, volunteers from the Marine Corps base that would come in and be our subjects. So Hogan's Alley is a mock town. It's like a Hollywood town that they have on the FBI Training Academy. And just about every day or every week, for sure, at Hogan's Alley, there's a bank robbery, And so
the crime stats in Hogan's Alley.
So for those training days, it's a terrible place to live. You would not want to live in Hogan's Alley, Virginia. Yeah.
Got it.
So you have to wear your sport coat. Because you want to dress like an agent, so you got to wear your sport coat and
you got a vest on
tie,
under
your tactical vest under that, and then you're dispatched with your squad. And so they did. They would do rotations where they would have your class broken down into maybe like a group of 5, just at random, and then of those 5, you would take turns being the leader. And the whole point was to just a learning experience.
Yeah.
To get people to think through a problem, give directions to other people, follow directions, raise your hand if you don't understand the directions or think that's not a good direction, So it was really, I thought it was a really cool learning experience. Like I say, just the opportunity to be there was awesome. I don't know what else about that, but I came out and
what happens on day one?
Yeah,
after so after 16 weeks,
so
where do you go?
So one of the interesting things, I was originally slated, let's see, because I had the financial background. Those of us with the financial background went through a little bit of extra training because we were expected to become financial crimes investigators. That was supposed to be our designated specialty to start off with, right? Well, again, I got lucky because I was originally slated to go to Atlanta, big city Atlanta. Well, Atlanta field office for the FBI actually covers the entire state of Georgia. So under the Atlanta field office, they call them resident agencies, but think of them as satellite offices. Brunswick, Savannah, Statesboro, Augusta, Macon, all these different small towns around Georgia where they have agents in an office, but they're all under the direction of Atlanta, if that makes sense. Right?
Yeah.
So I was supposed to go to Atlanta and investigate white collar crime, and Savannah had an opening, and Savannah was starting a violent street crimes task force, and the supervisor in Savannah looked at the list of new agents coming out and said, well, this Egelston guy, he's a former cop. I'll take him. So I got a phone call after I thought I was going to Atlanta asking me, hey, instead of going to Atlanta and working white collar crime, would you mind going to, would you mind? Like you are going to go to Savannah and work violent crime. And I was like, yes.
I was really excited about pouring through financial statements.
Right. But now I get to chase real bank robbers. Yes.
Right.
And I did. And it was awesome. So, yeah. So, and again, I think in our early conversations about my experience in law enforcement.
I'm playing dumb here a little bit. I've heard parts of this rich story before.
Right.
But it must be shared. So
but
we'll pretend.
Yeah. So, I want to explain that at a little deeper level because I think to some extent, I was attracted to, I won't even say the excitement, but just doing something different every day. Like if you're working white collar crime, your day is pretty much going to the office and looking through boxes of records and figuring out stuff on spreadsheets and then going out and talking to people about, and
I get why one of those looks sexier than the other too. How old were you then?
Oh, I graduated the academy when I was 30.
30. I think so. 30-year-old me would have much rather wanted to go chase bank robbers, I think.
Right.
And no matter what your archetype of personality is.
It just seemed more exciting.
Yeah.
And in the line of wanting to help people, I also thought, a guy with a gun pointed at a teller is more dangerous than a guy with a pen. Now, they both deserve justice, right?
Right.
And a guy with a pen can steal a lot more money and hurt a lot more people.
Actually, I think some of the white-collar crimes are doing significantly more harm in some situations.
They do.
At the time, you were more attracted. You felt like you would be more, you'd make a bigger
impact.
And
plus having, been a police officer for a short period of time, I really, really identified with being a police officer. It's funny I don't think we've ever talked about this. Maybe we did, but I would have to say, painful to say it, being an FBI agent was probably my second favorite job. Being a police officer was 100% me. It was just, and for so many reasons.
I want to hear all of them.
Yeah, no, I did it.
In the right order, you think that makes sense for the telling. But
so I was a police officer for a short period of time. Because I got hired by the Bureau.
What's a short period of time?
About a year.
A year?
About a year before the Bureau hired me.
That's enough time to get a sense of the job.
I wish I'd had more time on the street, but I enjoyed it. And the ironic thing is, if I had been a police officer for longer, I probably wouldn't have liked it. Because all of my buddies who stayed, I went through the police training academy with and stayed friends with, like within 3 to 5 years, they were like, done. It's a short period of time to be kind of done.
Job.
It's a stressful job. But what I liked about it, compared to being an FBI agent. So the police, fire department, paramedics, whatever, first responders, there's a reason they call them first responders. They're the first ones there. FBI is always following up on an investigation, even bank robberies.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, you know, the FBI is rarely the first agency on the scene of an incident.
Sure.
The local police are. Well, I investigated and did follow up for bank robberies as a police officer. Very different.
Yeah.
The immediacy of seeing how you're dealing with somebody.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
people right after,
yeah,
minutes after something went down, potentially.
you get feedback immediately. Is my presence making this situation worse or better? And if it's making it worse, what do I got to do to make it better? You know, or is this just going to be a really bad day and let's go to the mat? You know, I mean, that's again, that's not what I wanted, but the feedback of knowing how your response or how your input on a situation was affecting it, good or bad, was immediate. And if you had any active brain cells, you could pick up on that, right? You would know right away, like, am I doing a good job here, or are things getting worse, you know?
Right.
And then from that, the gratification that I got from doing that job, I knew at the end of the call that I had helped somebody.
Yeah.
FBI investigations take a long time.
Right.
And it's frustrating at times because of the pace, especially for guys and girls that are former cops. And just the whole system works differently.
A lot more paperwork, a lot more
levels of approval to get something done.
Right.
As a police officer, you have a lot of self-discretion. You make decisions on your own based on what, you know, obviously based in law, based on your knowledge of the law and policy, but based on what's happening right in front of you. This guy has to go to jail because he's committed a crime and that's the end of the story, or this guy's heading toward an incident that we don't want him to be in. Let's see if we can defuse it, like we talked about, and let's see if we can settle things down.
That's the cop you want.
That's the cop you want, right?
Yeah.
But with the Bureau, with any federal law enforcement agency, you just, you know, you're not authorized to act in most situations with that autonomy. You have to go through a process to get things approved to do things, and it just takes a long time. And so having come from an environment where it was like, look at me, I'm in this funny blue suit, I got a badge on my chest, they gave me a car, I own the city. You know, that's, you know, in a good way. I don't mean that. I don't mean that.
I really want to use my powers for good.
For good, right?
But I feel like there's power in that. And
there is, yeah.
It's
but it's also with responsibility, power with responsibility.
Right.
And so I want to temper my enthusiasm for that and not sound like somebody who was reckless or on a power trip, because I did not like working with guys that were on a clear power trip. You know? Yeah. And you can see it. They just want to tell people, they just want to give orders, you know?
Right.
So like some of the examples of when I was a police officer, here's things that I did as a police officer that I thought were good things.
Yeah.
More than once, but one incident in particular, this little old lady called in the middle of the night and she thought she heard a noise outside her door or her window or whatever. And it was, again, it's always snowing in my stories. I don't know why that was, but fresh snowfall. So I said, you know, ma'am, I'm going to check around your house and make sure. So I walked around the perimeter of the whole house, no footprints, no sign of anybody, you know, knocking snow off the windowsill or anything like that.
Yeah.
I came back and I said, ma'am, I've checked your house. There's no sign that anybody was here, but if you heard something, you are in my precinct tonight, and I'm going to make sure that I stay close to your house, and I will come back and check on you, and you go to sleep and you have a good night's rest. That made a difference in her night.
That feels really good.
That felt good.
Yeah.
That's a very small thing, you know?
Yeah.
But that, to me, is what a good cop does.
That's huge, man.
Yeah. So that's like
one. Well, that's a thing that I got to tell you. So as a software engineer, I didn't get. There's not a lot of opportunities in the line of work that I chose to make a difference in somebody's life where the the way you just described, that's sort of at a profound level, that's
it's a small,
in a moment, you know what I mean? Like,
but I put her at ease.
Well, I'm just saying that I imagine that being like, that's not your only story. Like,
right.
Like there's something like,
but to me, that's a good story of what a cop's typical day is like in a lot of places.
That's so cool.
You know?
Yeah.
There was another story where a lady in an apartment complex had been being harassed by her ex-husband. Mm-hmm. And that was in my precinct that night. And I was told, hey, you know, after you do your initial rounds, we want you to keep an eye on this situation. And so I went and I did my rounds. I waited till it was just getting dark. I went and parked in the back of the parking lot, and I blacked out the unit, so no lights. You know, even if you hit the brake lights, there's no lights that come on. If you open the door, the interior light doesn't go on. So I'm just sitting there, and sure enough, here comes this car with two guys in it, and they're cruising the parking lot, and the one guy looks over and sees me sitting in the squad car, and we make eye contact, and he takes off. The driver takes off, and I, you know, chased him down, pulled it. Well, it was her ex-husband with a baseball bat in the car. So what was he going to do? Maybe just mess up her car, maybe go in and mess her up. I don't know. But, you know, that's another incident where just being alert and aware and doing a logical thing may have prevented an act of violence, may have actually helped him from doing something really stupid.
He wasn't there to practice his swing, his baseball.
Well, he wasn't there to just have a chat with her, right?
Yeah, nothing nice was about to happen.
Right,
there.
right.
Yeah.
So anyway, but those are, you know, fortunately for me, I was never really involved in a major critical incident. The guys that go through that stuff, I mean, those are the real stories, you know.
Oh yeah.
But anyway,
I imagine.
So I've gotten far off topic here, but
well, getting back to let's kind of go back to your FBI story. So you had finished training and
wound up in Savannah, Georgia.
On violent crimes.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
And then what does that look like? So that's investigation after the fact, like you described.
It is
like a bank robbery, or like a domestic violence, or all of the above, or what are you?
No. So it's got to be some federal nexus.
Federal,
so
yeah, that
bank
makes
robbery
sense.
Because it's a federally insured institution. At that time, drug trafficking was on the rise nationwide.
Sure.
Early 90s. And so the Violent Crimes Task Force in Savannah worked with Chatham County Sheriff's Office and the Savannah Police Department. And the goal was to identify and target for prosecution the major drug dealers in the area.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what we were focused on. But along the way, any other violent crime that fell within federal jurisdiction became fair game for the task force to investigate and look into.
And what was the task force like? Is that you and 4 or 5 other agents, 100 other agents? Like what is
in between?
What is in between?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think there was one other agent from the squad, and Savannah at that time had like maybe 12 agents. So I think there were 2 of us. Maybe I'm wrong. I apologize if I can't remember. But I think there were 2 of us from the FBI office who then worked with, there had to be at least 4, maybe 6 detectives from Savannah PD, and then 2 to 4 detectives from Chatham County Sheriff's Office. And the best way it works, which is the way we did it in Savannah, I think, not from me, but from the more experienced agent and our supervisor. But you go in and you work with the local police to find out who are your problem children. Who are your known drug offenders, drug dealers that are supplying the community, that are committing acts of violence or intimidation along the way that you're having a hard time putting charges on. And then work an investigation through. I don't think we ever did a Title III wiretap in that case, but in other offices, that's a technique that the federal system uses more frequently, more frequently, but often federal investigations, especially for drug trafficking, wind up using a Title III phone intercepts,
Gotcha.
And it's just because we were able, even though there were only two of us, we brought in the funding and the resources and all of that to do things like that. So it was a great experience, and wound up working violent crime really almost the rest of my career. I had maybe 3 or 4 white-collar cases during my career, and the rest of it was fugitives, bank robberies, extortion, kidnapping, missing children.
Wow.
Yeah. All the stuff that wakes you up at
when
2 in the morning.
When you did the white collar one, were you like, man, I really missed out. I really wish I could have done more of this.
You know, I actually appreciated doing those couple investigations because of putting a big puzzle together. They were fairly large, complex investigations. One was an advance fee scheme when I was in Savannah. Some guy had been running a fake company. He preyed on elderly people who were unfortunately more gullible. You know, this is back in the day of just like rotary dial phones, basically. Right. You know, we're talking the early 90s.
Early 90s.
I guess there were push button
we
phones.
We were push button phones at that point.
But still,
yeah, there was
a lot of technology.
And not a lot of knowledge of scam awareness from telephone. Right. You know, now everybody knows everything's a scam.
Right. So this was him calling people on their home phones and giving them this pitch that, and I forget what his deal was, but some ridiculous story about you're entitled to a refund from whatever, but we need you to send us a deposit. I mean, the whole thing was illogical and didn't make sense.
And worked.
But it worked, yeah. Unfortunately, out of 100 people that they would call, maybe 2 or 3, you know, and again, it was usually the elderly people because they had more trust. They weren't aware of these scams. They thought people were nice and, you know, okay, sounds good. So, you know, he had made thousands of dollars moving around the country doing this under different names and blah, blah, blah.
And you just go look at these bank accounts and look at first person reports of talking with them.
Yeah, so it was initially, I'm trying to remember kind of how this went, but initially it was getting enough interviews of victims, and they were all over the country. I mean, he at one time had been based in Georgia, and that's why we were working the case. But I'm not even sure he had already moved on. No, I guess he was still there, because when we did the search warrant, we went to his place. He had been in Florida and moved to Georgia. So his base of operation was in Georgia, which gave FBI Atlanta jurisdiction over it. You know, gave the U.S. Attorney's Office in Georgia jurisdiction. So the first wave of the case was just doing phone interviews of victims all around the country. And I remember staying late in the office to call people on the West Coast and vice versa and whatever. Got enough of those interviews that the U.S. Attorney's Office agreed we had enough probable cause for not only a search warrant for the apartment where he was operating out of with his little bank of rats who were victimizing people like this on a phone bank. You know, they had like this, forget if they had a little office maybe or a little apartment that they just had a phone bank and they were just constantly calling people all day long. But I had enough information. I got a seizure warrant for his bank accounts. That was fun. That was really fun to walk into whatever the bank was, I forget, and serve them a search warrant and say, that a-hole's money is now under control of the federal government, and we're going to use it to refund, to restore victims of crime. And so they did,
cool.
You know.
So they just
it was pennies on the dollar
or something, and and then he goes through prosecution, and then they divvy it all up and try and
part of the
return people's
process is to order restitution to the victims. It was pennies on the dollar, but I felt good to get some of it back and take it out of his hands, if nothing else.
Right. Yeah. And prevent more from falling out of other people's pockets. That's cool.
So I had a couple of
white-collar
cases.
What about the less white collar? Like, what are standout, like when you're early in your career, you're there in Savannah, what was like something where you think it made a big impact on you, like that where you grew a lot as an agent, maybe through the experience, or Oh, just any where or it was just sufficiently like, holy shit. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I'm sure that you've got some of those. Like,
Well, yeah. So one violent crime case that really stood out just because of the, it's the kind of case that that you sometimes see portrayed when they do, the real stories of the FBI or whatever. It never was. But typically the FBI doesn't investigate homicide cases because there's no jurisdiction. Like if a homicide occurs in Mesa or wherever, that's the local police under state law.
got it.
But if a homicide occurs on a military reservation or Native American reservation or other federal area like a federal park, national park,
Yeah.
if crimes are committed in those areas by a civilian, by not a member of the military, then it becomes FBI jurisdiction. So Savannah, Georgia is home of Hunter Army Airfield.
Okay.
And right outside of Savannah, Georgia is Fort Stewart Military Reservation, which I think it's the largest Army military reservation east of the Mississippi by landmass. They do a lot of tank training there or whatever. So anyway, there was a guy who lived in a wooded area in Savannah, the city of Savannah. His house backed up to Hunter Army Airfield, and he disappeared one day, went missing. Foul play was suspected early on because he was a successful business owner. He was a framer, worked in the construction industry. Billy Charnock was his name. And we didn't get called in until they found his body, unfortunately, buried in a shallow grave on the military base behind his house. And so we got involved in that investigation because that was then federal jurisdiction.
Base.
Yeah,
Got it.
and so it was just it was a very intense case to work on. I won't go into a lot of detail, but we had the body excavation that had to take place. And so we were out in the woods all day, carefully doing, and I was the case agent at the time, so there were other agents who were trained in evidence response who were doing the work, but I was kind of there as the case agent. And, they're going through and sifting the dirt and removing it layer by layer.
Lose any clues.
Exactly.
Got
And
it.
doing the grid and taking photos and, very meticulous, long day. Recovered his body, very somber scene, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
Had to send his body for medical examination in Atlanta. Got the results. Major head trauma was apparent cause of death. And by that time, Savannah PD had been working the case. And of course, the house was sealed off. We got a search warrant for the house, went in there with one of the agents who was trained in the evidence recovery. And he found blood splatter on the wall of the kitchen table. And long story, but it comes kind of back to white collar because the prime suspect was his roommate who had been forging checks from the business checkbook. So there was motive and opportunity and all the elements came together, and he wound up getting convicted in state court for homicide. And it was just a really, as a new agent,
Yeah.
like I said, it's kind of rare for the FBI to be involved in a homicide case. So as a new agent, being involved in that and then learning from and
Huge
watching.
learning opportunity.
Oh, yeah. Watching the guys with more experience do the interviews, sitting with Frank Bennett when he did interviews of all of the people around it. And then we went to interview the suspect.
Sure.
Steve Amos, Fitz Clark, oh my gosh, Claude King, all the guys who were involved in processing the crime scene and stuff like that. And just, good experience. Bad, horrible case, of course,
Right, but I mean that's what you were.
But that's what we were there to do. Yeah.
You were a career that guy, and
Yeah.
you
and
needed.
it really, solidified my interest in working violent crime, and also then getting into the FBI's behavioral analysis program. So, my interest in psychology and your interest in psychology, and then getting into the behavioral analysis program. And I was in that for like 20 years just as a field coordinator. So I did receive, some advanced training and experience working those types of cases. And that is where the FBI, when asked, does go in and assist a local police department with a homicide investigation or another serious crime if they ask for that. Like unknown offender profile, victimology, lab work, whatever. Those are things that a field coordinator in the behavioral analysis program assists with. So kind of the go-between between the local police detective and the real experts back at Quantico or at the, now in Stafford, Virginia, where they do that work. So
got it. And that was for Georgia?
At the time when I got into that, And then I stayed in that program as I moved around to different places.
Okay.
And always made that one of my, one of the things that I would use to introduce myself when I would go meet with a new, for me, a new agency, if I got transferred and now I'm back in Illinois working in my home territory where I knew some of the guys already, but I would go out to a county sheriff's office or a local police department just to make liaison, really, just to represent the FBI and stay in touch. Mm-hmm. And I would always offer up, hey, if you guys have any cold cases that you'd like a second look at, I'm in that program. I can help get resources. I'd be happy to. And we did generate a lot of work for the Bureau doing that, through those means. And I really enjoyed that. I feel like that's one way the FBI kind of gives back to local law enforcement through those programs.
So, and is that what I imagine? So like for a behavioral, what was the name of the program?
The behavioral analysis program.
Behavioral analysis. Now that's where you're like looking at a cold case or a hot case, and you're kind of trying to put yourself in the mind of
the victim or the perpetrator.
Both.
Right, yeah.
To try and understand what went down after the fact. Okay, yeah. Dude, you would love that show I told you about. That
I got to find
True
the show.
Detective.
Yeah,
Totally. That's I think it's, I don't know that they were called out, and they might have been
were they
U.S.
in that,
Marshals
were they
or
doing
something.
Profiling
Actually,
like stuff
but
like
yeah,
that?
it was that kind of thing. Basically, the series starts off where they find this woman in a field, and you can tell that there was like a lot of ritual. That was like sort of pagan around how her body was lined up and all that. Yeah. And that's basically what these detectives were doing, is they were like trying to work through the psychology of the perpetrator and the victim and try and piece together where they were and whether it was going to happen again, that kind of thing. So that was you.
Well, at a very at the entry level. Yeah, I don't want to, but it was cool to be part of that, right? Like I say, I never want to overstate what I've done, but again, I just appreciate that somehow in my life I
Jim's
wound up
very humble
doing that. So, but you touch on a good point. So, just like a real big 10,000-foot view of behavioral analysis, sometimes called profiling, and then profiling has developed a pejorative meaning. Unfortunately, it's really not. It's not accurate the way it's said sometimes. But behavioral analysis, for it to be successful, requires more interaction between the victim and the offender. So, for example, your typical armed robbery at a gas station or a convenience store at midnight, where somebody goes in and shoots the clerk and takes the money. There's not a lot of behavior to analyze there because you know what the motive is. It's robbery. Yeah. It's a crime of opportunity or randomness, Right. Unless you start seeing a pattern, and then you can get into small pieces of the behavioral aspect of that. But like you say, in a ritual crime like that, where there's signature aspects, where there's ritual aspects, where there's something of personal significant meaning to the perpetrator, that's where the psychology comes in, and that's where it gets really interesting. Yeah. And that's where all I know is to say, hey, you guys back at the academy, you know all about this stuff. Yeah, you guys back at the academy, you know how to do this. I'm just going to send you the file, you know.
Yeah,
but you do learn along the way, you know.
Oh, really interesting. That's I had a question about that. Shit. It'll come back to me.
Well, so but if I may, let me just jump real quick to like I think we have talked about this before, but there was a particular moment in my career where I realized this is a fucked up job to do. You know, and
I was getting to that.
Yeah, and I'm glad.
I was going to bring up.
Do you want to wait for that, or should I go now?
I want to say this thing so I don't forget it again, and then I want you to, and then I want to go back to that moment, and then come back to the thing. Yeah. So I was going to bring up. So you were on the news recently, local news program, or I'm not sure what that one was, but I saw that. Where you were kind of, you were describing sort of getting in the head of a violent crime that happened here locally.
Was it the body in Apache Junction, or was it the little girl from Glendale who got recovered in Montana?
This was a girl who was she was like she was hiking by herself or out on a jog, and then somebody attacked her who had like a crush on her or wanted to be her or something like that.
Right. His statement when he was arrested was, "I wanted to be like her," or something like that. Right.
Something like that. Yeah. But I could tell that it sounded like, I mean, you had been called in to consult. I think in some capacity.
For that particular case? Mm-hmm. No, it was just a matter of the local news wanting somebody with law enforcement background to comment on the story.
Right.
And give a little insight, you know. So I had nothing to do with that investigation. And my comments were just based on my knowledge of having been involved in those types of investigations and what law enforcement was going to look for. I mean, I kind of recall saying, well, based on that location, there might be people with cameras on the back of their house. Because he was actually picked up on video, if I recall, from that story. And then his comment about he wanted to be like her. I think that was really you don't hear that. You don't hear that every day.
That means something,
right? That means
to
something.
A behavioral analyst.
Yeah.
Got it. I was going to reference that for context, but let's go back to right where I lost train of thought. And you said there was this kind of aha moment you had.
So it happened in when I was working in McAllen, Texas. So it would have been sometime between 2000 and 2004. And so I'd been in law enforcement by that time for over 10 years.
Yeah.
So it took me a while for the light bulb to go off. But at least I had that moment, and I guess I'll get to that. But we were out on a early morning fugitive arrest. Mm-hmm. Typically, you go at dark 30, as they say, so that nobody's up and moving. You catch them by surprise. It's safer. It's typically safer for everybody involved that way. They're not partying with 10 people.
Yeah.
They're kind of coming down off of whatever they did last night.
Right.
It's a better situation. So that was our typical arrest scenario. So I forget what the guy had done. It was a serious crime for the FBI to be involved in the fugitive aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So if a person commits a crime in any given state in the Union and then flees that state to avoid being prosecuted, the FBI can have authority to get a fugitive warrant. And the only purpose that serves is to find the person, bring them back to the state where they committed the crime to face trial. And the FBI is usually not involved in the investigation itself, if that makes sense. So the underlying crime, like there's a famous line out of the movie The Fugitive with Tommy Lee Jones, right?
Yeah.
Where Harrison Ford says, "I didn't kill my wife," and he says, "I don't care." That's the truth. Like, not my job, man. Like, you're just going back to where it happened. So anyway, we go into this house, and it was not a forced entry. It was a knock and announce, and they let us in. Well, as soon as we go in, we could hear the guy crash out the back bedroom window. We, you know, in your head, you're picturing what coincides with that noise I just heard. Breaking glass, wood splintering.
He's getting away.
He's getting away.
Yeah.
So just by virtue of the fact of kind of like where we came in on the stack and where we were positioned in the house,
Yeah.
I'm by the front door, and I had made contact with, I don't know if she was his mother, but she was kind of the mother of the house, middle-aged lady with children. And this commotion goes on, so a couple other guys head down the hallway toward the bedroom. And when you're in a situation like that, obviously you don't want the residents moving around freely for safety.
Yeah.
Our safety, their safety. You know, you don't know, they might be reaching for a cigarette and you don't know what they're reaching for.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you got to control people's actions and movements to a degree. Well, as all this was going on, she hears her children crying from one of the back bedrooms where the agents are now running to jump out the window and chase this guy down the alley or whatever was going on. So she's standing there, and her natural response is she wants to go
She's
take
gotta
care
go
of her
get
kids.
there and take care of her kids. Yeah.
And I understood
Motherly
that.
impulse is
Right.
kicking in.
And I
yeah.
understood that, but at the same time, I didn't want to let that happen. Not because I was being a jerk, not because I'm trying to be Mr. Control Freak, but because we don't want people. Our guys just went down that hallway. I don't see them now. I don't know where they're at. And if you come up behind them and it could wind up just being escalating into something you don't want it to escalate to.
Sure.
So I politely told her, sorry, you got to stay here. And I'm hearing the kids crying. Now, it's a very trivial thing, but it was at that moment that I realized this is fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not natural.
That's not trivial.
That's not
that's
natural.
in that moment. Like your logic makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you're working in the children's and the mother's best interests.
Yeah.
But because
I knew the children are safe. I know nothing has happened to them other than they're scared by the noise and the activity, and they're going to have to wait for a couple of minutes until, and then eventually once I knew the guys were out, I went back there with her and made sure that she had control of the kids and sat her down and, all of that while they got the guy.
But there was a split second where you had to get between a mother and her children, and that felt yucky.
It did. It did feel yucky.
Yeah.
So take that and magnify it by 1,000 times for the guys that go into the aftermath of a school shooting and see the kids and deal with that.
Yeah.
So anyway, all that just to say that, any job like that, any first responder type job, military, paramedics, firefighters, going to see and deal with bad stuff that normal people don't. Yeah. And you have to learn how to process that. And the first step is that instant where I was standing there realizing this is screwed up. And, that moment of recognition, I think, is important. The guys who know they're screwed up have a better chance of unscrewing it than the guys who think, I'm 10 foot tall and bulletproof and none of this bothers me. That ain't true. It bothers you. You just don't realize it. You're not dealing with it.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Let's take a quick break here. I need to fill these cups.
Sure.
And so we'll break for a moment.
All right. And
I need the guest just reminded the host he should remember to clap his hands to sync the audio. Thank you, sir. So let's pick up where we left off. So you were kind of at that aha moment where, and it seemed like, that's wisdom that you're trying to give to somebody who might want to go down that career track, that they're going to find themselves inevitably in a situation, and it's okay and probably it's healthy to have that. This is pretty effed up.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That moment. Right. That's cool.
And actually, part of the recruiting and training process is designed to prepare you for that. But it's I'm sure there are people more self-aware than I am.
An instructor talking about it and being in that moment.
Yeah. And it was to me, the funny thing about that story is just that it was not, thank God, it was not a dramatic incident where I'm dealing with, something truly horrible. But the anguish of a mom wanting to comfort her children, and I'm the guy standing there saying, not right now, please wait.
Yeah.
You know?
At that point, did she know?
I think she understood.
You were FBI.
Oh yeah,
and,
yeah.
Okay,
We had
well,
announced we were wearing,
full
placards
gear,
and full gear, identifying emblems. Yeah, she knew, and she knew the guy in the back bedroom shouldn't have been there. She knew that.
Okay.
But
Gotcha.
I mean, that situation worked out well for everybody, except I think she had to replace her window. Not our fault.
That is not bad. I mean,
Right.
I'm remembering many movie scenes.
No, it's a very minor thing. Really. Yeah.
It's cool that it ended that way.
Yeah.
But when I imagine somebody who's having to experience that moment and they weren't so fortunate, and something bad did happen.
Yeah.
That's where I think the psychological baggage and
because exactly, and that's again, that's where I appreciate that I was very fortunate in my career not to have that kind of a really bad critical incident. I mean, I certainly dealt with bad stuff and saw bad stuff and all that, but never, fortunately for me, to the degree that so many people go through. And so for me to be able to process and overcome that little bump in the road doesn't mean much. It's the people who deal with the dead kids and the horrible things that are done to victims and all that stuff. It'll wear you down, man.
I'm sure. What was your reaction? So when you fully processed the situation, maybe a day or a week later, did it affect, I don't know, how you, I'm sure for you to bring it up in that way, that it affected the rest of your story in probably really profound ways. But was there anything immediately you said, I want to do something slightly different with a different group? Or did you feel, if anything, did you feel, that's a complicated emotion you just described.
Right.
And I think that on a lot of analysis, you might actually be kind of pleased with how you processed it. And,
I was. It's just like I say, to the extent that I kind of had that moment of objectivity where I'm like, ooh, that's a weird situation. Most people in their daily life don't do this.
Yeah.
And then to be able to extrapolate that to the bigger picture and recognize that, a lot of my friends who have gone through worse things, I need to appreciate what they've been through.
Oh, yeah.
And it's become much more prevalent over the years in law enforcement, but the term self-care, So we would refer to it as a mental health day. And it was, it usually had more to do with you're pissed off at the decision the boss made rather than something that just happened on the street. But I think nowadays people in those types of careers are more open to the idea that it's okay, as they say, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to, hey, I need to step away and talk to somebody about this, whether it's a professional or a friend or whatever.
Right.
I think it's, it's a bad idea to go to a whiskey bottle for solace after something like that. I think it's a good idea to go to the gym after something like that and burn that emotion off in a healthy way, So
Sure.
a lot of, I don't know that it changed me in a profound way other than just that, like I say, that moment of recognition. And I carried that with me. Again, I don't want to over dramatize the event. It's a small event. It was that realization in my head that, that's not a normal day for most people at work,
Right.
And I need to make sure that I deal with it in a healthy way, because you have to, in those careers, and especially in those moments, unfortunately, you do have to be, you have to compartmentalize things.
Yeah.
I always pride myself on, and I think a lot of my ability to do good interviews and develop information over the years was based on my ability to empathize with other people and hear their story, let them speak, hear their story, whether they're right or wrong. Ultimately, identify with where they're coming from. It doesn't mean I'm giving them a pass on anything. You know what I mean? So that applies to a witness of a crime, the person who committed the crime, or the victim of a crime. Doesn't matter. You want to try to understand where they're coming from and then use that connection and psychology to further your goal, I guess. Mm-hmm. You have to compartmentalize yourself to an extent to do that, because if you go down that rabbit hole, you can be in a dark place.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to become callous to it. And and I think, if anything, I guess what I tried to learn from that is, in the moment, you know, you got to stay professional, you got to be detached, but afterwards, don't pretend it didn't happen. Deal with it. You know, let yourself absorb that and feel that later in private time or whatever, and then deal with it in a healthy way, if that makes sense.
And not just deal with it, learn from it. And I'm sure that affected how you planned future scenarios where potentially
wait
you
till
were
she
putting
takes the kids to school. No, I don't know. Well, but see, we do take things like that into account. Law enforcement does. You know, they try to be aware. And again, you know, this was a long time ago. I wasn't the primary case agent on that particular arrest, so I don't know the details. But you try to prevent things like having children involved and stuff like that.
Well, and I'm not just talking about like a logistical planning sense. More just like when I'm in that situation next time, what did I take from this? What did I do really well in this retrospective? You know, like what am I going to use next time from this? The knowledge of that experience when it's real time, and I don't have I have seconds to react. Right. Yeah, that's the stuff it is really profound, because that's how you build your arsenal of experience
that's your
and knowledge.
Life experience.
That's right. So, you mentioned to me one time also that you were involved in some sort of, it was like I remember you had a really strong opinion about like field versus, it was like, it was an approach the FBI takes to training where you guys would like sort of do, you would almost role play out and storyboard out actual, I think that's what it was. Actual things going down.
So you're talking about like a training exercise and a tabletop versus a field training exercise? Or a full scale exercise?
I think that's what it was. And I think that like the field exercise, there was like, those could go south in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do have a strong opinion about that. So it's topical now because, you know, school shootings and active shooter drills that are conducted at schools and workplaces and other places. And for the most part, I do not encourage, you know, whether you call it a field training or a full-scale exercise, I do not endorse, for the most part, those types of activities which involve civilians as role players or being out in the real world in an uncontained environment to play out a scenario. Because I've got probably half a dozen examples during my career where something that started out as a training exercise like that turned into knocking on the wrong door of somebody who's not part of the exercise, who doesn't know what's going on. And like, now you're presenting people who identify themselves and are law enforcement officers, and they're coming in with a script for a scenario in their head, and the guy opening the door thinks it's, because it is real life going on in front of him. He has no idea that these guys are trying to like do their Easter egg hunt or whatever it is, you know what I mean?
Training exercise suddenly gets real.
There are just countless examples of like an unannounced, a long time ago, some department did an unannounced simulated bank robbery, and the teller passed out and boom, fell, you know, head first on the floor. That's not good. That doesn't help anybody. So I do think that there are absolutely applications for those types of exercises, but they need to be very contained,
Everybody's got to be in on it.
Everybody's got to be in on it. Yes. Ding, ding, ding. And you don't go outside of this perimeter. Now, it doesn't, it could be the houses here on this block. And we've done that for missing or abducted child scenarios. We've done exercises where you'll get a group of people who volunteer, community group. Oh yeah, this street is green light. These houses are green light, but not those houses. If that's very, very carefully controlled, maybe I'm okay with that. But man, even that can go south.
And then, so the alternative then?
So the alternative is a tabletop exercise. And this actually goes toward cognitive development.
Right.
Because if I'm not mistaken, and you might know a lot more about this, but research has shown, outside of law enforcement, research has shown if you rehearse something in your head, it's almost as productive as rehearsing the activity itself. So
it makes sense to me logically. Because you're having to do something creative. You're having to imagine scenarios.
Right. Now you have to have the base knowledge of having done it. Like I couldn't project, well, I guess to an extent you can, but it's going to end badly. Like I couldn't project being a ski jumper, where they go a slalom jumper.
Right.
Oh yeah, I think I'll practice the giant slalom in my head for an afternoon and then go try it.
I should be totally qualified to do that.
Yeah. So plan on visiting me in the ER if I choose to go that route. But if you've done an activity and you rehearse it mentally, studies have shown that
that makes really good sense.
Right, because you need muscle memory, you need to have done it, and you need to dwell on the positive, the successful experiences, obviously, right?
Well, it's much easier to visualize because you've been through it, and you
exactly.
Yeah.
So the 5 years that I was a supervisor, I was in the terrorism arena instead of violent crime. So I guess just enhanced violent crime with a different motive, whatever. But a lot of the activities that we went through were exercises with the private sector to prepare for an incident. There's a huge, huge value in having a room full of people with different backgrounds and different responsibilities sit down and go through a totally just fictitious on paper scenario.
Storyboard the whole thing out. Like it's a movie, we're all doing it together.
Yep.
And so
bunch
of rich perspective, all contributing. Yeah.
And that could include anything from like, all right, it's a typical Wednesday afternoon. You've just gotten back to your office after lunch, and the news shows that a bomb went off in Phoenix. And then you go into the detail, of course, of like, well, what was the target? What was the blast radius? Were people hurt? Whatever. How's that going to affect what you do? You're the operations manager for American Airlines at Sky Harbor. What are you going to do?
Right.
You going to change anything?
Your field exercise where they have no plan. Yeah.
Right. So you can get
tabletop. You get a lot. I can see how you get a lot out of that.
Yeah, and actually you can actually. Another advantage, in my opinion, of a tabletop exercise is you can play that out very quickly. Whereas if you're now operating in a field training exercise, even if you're in a controlled environment, you're wasting time by having people walk back and forth and having monitors
managing the set.
Watch the whole. So you can get, I think, as much, if not more, benefit from a tabletop exercise as you can from most field training exercises. Now, field training exercises do become necessary, not just important, but necessary for the tactical teams, for the boots on the ground type people. You got to do that. You got to do that. And it's usually better if you have other guys from those teams being the role players, so everybody knows what's expected. Everybody knows what the script is. Nobody's going to go off script either inadvertently or trying to be creative or whatever. Because I've seen things go really bad in those out in the real world training exercises that all of a sudden make believe hits reality, and it can just cause a bad situation.
Yeah. Got it.
Well, and I'll go back to that real quick.
Do it. Yeah, finish it then.
Like, especially now for schools, I think it would be traumatizing for school-age children to be put through an
I don't want my
active
kid
shooter drill.
going through anything like that.
Exactly.
I wasn't exposed to that kind of...
Exactly. I mean, we had fire drills, and I think I'm old enough that we still had the cover under your desk for a nuclear bomb or whatever it was. Right?
Cover.
Yeah. You know, even as a 9-year-old, I'm like, I don't think this desk is going to stop a nuclear
like a lot of
bomb.
bullshit.
Right.
Yeah.
But to do an active shooter drill in an elementary school, I think that traumatizes children. And at the same time, who's your likely active shooter at a school? One of the students. So are you not now preparing that person
preparing them all for
to do a little
being
better
afraid of each other?
Well, and not only that, but if you've got
you're training.
You're training the active shooter. This is how the school's going to respond.
See, that's insight.
This is where they're going to hide.
That's insight. Somebody who actually did that job.
So because one of the things that I still do is I offer active shooter awareness and prevention training. I'm not a tactical guy. I don't present my, I know a little bit, but there are tactical guys, much better experience and preparation than I could provide. But from the behavioral analysis side, I know, more than most people probably about recognizing a threat, mitigating a threat, responding to a threat. How do you stop it before it happens? But I'm very careful when I'm asked to do those presentations, and I don't want to sound like a jerk, but do you want your entire workforce in there, or do you want your security directors, your managers, your supervisors, your HR people in there? That's my target audience.
Yeah.
And any of those could wind up being the bad guy. But why do you want to provide that training to a wide group? You want to provide it to the people who are in position to use it, recognize it.
This is where everybody will be hiding.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
It's logical.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to hit on that for the school-age kids.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's a wild time we live in that's even a topic to discuss.
Right.
But, I feel like there's something, I'm not a huge fan of the big steel grate that's wrapped around the schools and stuff like that. I feel like that's not that wasn't a part of my childhood. And,
but it is effective. Unfortunately, it is actually,
Fortunately, it's effective. Unfortunately,
it's necessary. Right.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Well, and I wonder about, there's a natural sort of escalation that just kind of happens. That's part of...
We become a more paramilitary state.
Yeah.
Over time.
Right. And it just feels like a sucky path.
Yeah.
And I think there is an element, like part of that escalation, though, is an event occurs, like 9/11. 9/11 occurs. We go to the Middle East, and thousands of Americans die, and WMD didn't
materialize.
Didn't materialize.
The Patriot Act came along.
Right,
we're
sweeping away
everybody.
the freedom, and it's like it does feel like to a lot of people, I think, watching this all go down, it feels like an overreaction. It feels like we're sensationalizing a horrible event that occurred, and but I don't really want to say let's be ostriches and let's bury our heads in the sand. You can't ignore it, and you don't want to, because if you can prevent a school shooting, then it's worth it. But it's like there is this element of we're kind of robbing so much innocence of our, and I see this as a parent, just like when I grew up and I was my kid's age, there was a pack of us that, like, our parents weren't even really aware which house we were. They kind of knew which house we were at. Yeah, go out and play.
Go out and play. Yeah.
And there was a pack of us that just kind of, we had like my dad set a boundary of the block.
Don't go past this block. Or
whatever, you don't go past here without talking to me.
Don't cross the busy street. Yeah.
He didn't, like, we were at, the neighbor's house across the street.
If they wanted you, they'd go out and call your name or see where your bicycle was parked, and that's the house you're at probably, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's all gone.
Oh, yeah.
I got to tell you, as a parent, it's radically different. Now it's like you have to vet a parent, and you're looking at all of the other, parents like through a very
well, it's the
with a lot of
lens of
scrutiny.
Suspicion. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it just sucks.
Yeah.
It's such a bad vibe.
Yeah.
It's because 99% of us are all still basically pretty awesome. You know?
Well, yes, debatable, but yes, I see your point. Yes. So it's interesting because having worked child abduction investigations and gotten a lot of training in that, if I'm not mistaken, historically, and it's a horrible number regardless of what it is, but historically, the number of children that are the victims of a true stranger abduction, where something bad happens, has remained pretty steady over decades. What's changed is our perception and awareness of it.
Yeah.
Because what used to happen in Madison, Wisconsin, 20 years ago was only known, maybe 30 or 40 years ago was only known in the vicinity of Madison, Wisconsin. Now there's good and bad, because the good news is you want people to know something has happened, Amber Alerts, pictures on, the internet, try to find this car. You want all of that to try to help resolve the crimes. But it has made people hyper aware of those incidents, and they think that happens all the time.
You just told me it's steady state.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it's from what I recall,
approximately.
It's been
Let's just say approximately. Like, it's not like they haven't just exploded.
No.
But they haven't reduced either.
No.
Now, that's an important stat to think about, because that means all of our heightened awareness and looking at each other like we're all criminals. What is that doing to our collective psyche? Like, in a moment like this, where we're all at each other's damn throats, I feel like.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes from the fact that we're all sort of expect the worst of everybody around us. That's where I said 99% of us are awesome.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
I think being just a philosopher and with a background that was entirely, my professional career was in, at Intel and at companies that had all of these annual required
competition to keep your own job. Kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I was going to say not just that. I was going to say annual required trainings around sexual harassment, around proper, basically I lived a very sheltered life is what I'm getting at compared to you. I saw, professionally, definitely. Like the cubicle life, there's no shootings. It's very rare.
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully. And if there are, you would see it. Whereas me, statistically, it's very unlikely I would see it.
Right.
So that has me, I get that I have kind of rose-colored glasses on, but I do sense in our culture, in our collective, a general distrust that is not deserved.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And I think that ratchets up the tension on almost all of our interactions.
Yeah.
Because we didn't used to have all of 24-hour news, social media, all these things that are just throwing it in our face.
Right.
And the incidence rate per capita, or however you want to think about it, is approximately the same as it always has been. So all this heightened awareness isn't really buying us much, it seems like. The bad things are going to happen. It's filling us with anxiety and distrust, and just generally expecting the worst from the humans around us that are, for the most part, pretty good people.
Right. Another kind of basic example of that, but I think an important example, especially for parents, like stranger danger. Well, if your kid gets lost at a mall or you're out, whatever, do you really want them to hide from all strangers? Or
find a mom.
Find a mom with a kid.
Find a mom.
Find a lady or a man wearing a name tag at the cash register.
See, this is situational awareness that I give my kid any public situation.
Right.
It's like,
if you
this
can't
is
find
where we
me,
meet. Yes. If you can't find me, there has to be a plan, and there has to be this is how. I don't want to. tell my kids, stranger danger, everybody
is bad.
untrustworthy. Yeah,
right.
because they might be able to help you find me in that situation.
Exactly.
And if I can give you a few little hints where that manage to give you useful information should that horrible outcome occur,
right,
and manage to keep your faith in humanity intact,
right,
as you become an adult.
And it's all nuanced. Like, okay, don't go down the dark alley and wake up the guy sleeping with the newspaper over his face. Don't wake him up. But look for the guy around the corner who's selling hot dogs. Ask him for help. Maybe he'll help you. You know?
Yeah.
Right? But
there's little things like that that I feel like we could all just get a lot better at, and we wouldn't have to be so damn mad at each other all the time. I don't know.
Probably right.
To the aspiring cop or FBI agent, somebody who is young and has a similar calling.
Let's call it. And I do use that word. It was a calling, absolutely. Yeah.
It really seems like it. Like as you describe sort of your psyche and how you were raised and all these things. Like, what advice? Like, what do you give to help that person? Like, you already, I think, gave a lot of really useful insights into the process as it existed in the 80s.
Yeah, 30 years ago, whatever,
Right. But now, with that 30 years of experience, what advice do you have for the kid getting out of high school who feels a similar calling?
Yeah.
That puts them on the right path, that makes them the clear head that I know you are in the room.
Try to be.
Right, I can confirm it.
Well, thank you.
I haven't gone through any like horrible situations, but I definitely my short list of people that I would want to go through that with. You're definitely there.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
So like those things. Like, what is it? Getting started, general career advice, ideas for navigating the politics, just all of it. You know,
unfortunately, that's become a bigger piece of it, in my opinion, because
that is everywhere, kids. That's everywhere in my business. That's your business. There's always interpersonal and politics.
Right.
And what's your advice? What would you do? Fully unprepared. Like, I didn't tell you I was going to ask that question. But.
Well, so, this has come up recently in, meeting with young people, because once in a while, through a friend or whatever, I'll be asked to help a young person with their school project because they're interested in law enforcement and they want to write about that career path and whatever.
Yeah.
And, obviously, good or bad, I try to be very authentic with people. And right now, the way the environment is a lot different than when I came into law enforcement. I don't know if I would do it again. I don't know if I could, in good faith, encourage.
Advice is go find something else to do.
Go find something else. Be a software guy and be a smart guy like Curtis and, do that. But if somebody's really intent on going into law enforcement, one of my, just going back to the practical aspects.
They might feel a calling like you did.
Right.
And so...
and I hope people still do.
Yeah, we need those people.
Right.
And your experience could help direct them towards a path, I think, that is to be a stellar example of the people that do that. Well, and I say that, I never worked with you, man, but I recognize that intuition you described, getting between the mother and her kids in a really stressful situation, and the after analysis and the just the also a lot of the thoughts around the tabletop versus regular, like all of these things. I think there's a common thread there that is, with great power comes great responsibility. And
absolutely.
Yep.
So
I'm doing an inadequate job describing it.
No. That's spot on. So, if somebody's really intent on doing it, go in with your eyes open and know that not everybody loves you. And I knew that. My own family tried to talk me out of being a cop,
Yeah.
like their experience with cops was they got a speeding ticket from a cop, like, well, there's more to it than that, but I understand, So go in it with your eyes open. You have to have a thick skin. You have to be able to be very tolerant. You should be very tolerant of things like that. You don't want to overreact to something. And sometimes I wish I had as much patience in my personal life as I have been able to apply in my professional life, but for whatever reason.
That's a funny insight.
It is. For whatever reason, when I switch on that cop hat or that agent hat that I used to wear, I remain more objective. We've talked about this quite a bit. When I'm able to step outside of myself and look at the situation objectively, I handle it way better. And so even when I went through my first police training academy to become a street officer. That was around the time of the Rodney King incident. And our instructors used to remind us, when you're out there, you're in the public eye, conduct yourself professionally, and always remember that whatever you do, you would want to be able to watch that videotape and live with it.
You represent an organization that the public needs to trust, or you put your coworkers in danger.
Yes. And it sounds trite, but nobody dislikes a bad cop more than a good cop, because it makes your job harder and the public doesn't trust you, and it just cascades, and I think unfortunately we're seeing a lot of that in our society now. And, I'll leave my personal opinion on some of that aside, but because obviously I identify with the cops, right? And I think we need cops. We need good cops, though, right?
Well, there's a reason most people don't go more than 10 miles over the speed limit, because of those speeding tickets.
Yeah, me too.
I mean,
right. That's kind of the tolerance.
This all works because somebody agrees to do that job and be in that awkward situation. And hopefully you hope they have the style and class of people like yourself, I would say, that do that. That's awesome.
So, but I don't know. Did you want any more on that, or that's...
Well, if you have any other, I would like to veer off right now into psychologically what's happening between your professional and your personal life, that you recognize the distinction in how you process stuff happening around you, the emotions that happen. I want to go philosophical, psychiatric. I want to go totally down that rabbit hole with you right now. But I really think that this is a rare opportunity for somebody with your experience and professional background, for people that feel that calling. You said go in with eyes wide open, know what it is that you're signing up for. And are there other things you tack on to? I'm sure there's a host of things.
Yeah, so many people say, oh, what should I major in? What should I study? And the last thing I would recommend is criminal justice, because if you've got 100 applicants, 75 of them have a criminal justice degree. What's going to set you apart? Plus, if for whatever reason you don't get selected by a law enforcement agency, what are you going to do with your criminal justice degree? Better that you have a little different perspective. Whatever.
That's why I asked that question. That's brilliant. That's good advice. I've never done that job, but that logically makes so much sense.
I'm not disparaging a criminal justice degree, but if that's your path academically, then you've put yourself in that category. And if you, for whatever reason, don't get hired or find out you don't like it, now what are you going to do with it? It's kind of like art history. Well, that's fascinating, but go find a job,
Right.
The Louvre isn't hiring today. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, any skill today, obviously, computer forensics, cyber security, great knowledge base to bring into the law enforcement arena. Every case, as I was getting ready to retire, more and more, every case that we worked on had those requirements. You needed somebody that understood social media. You needed somebody that understood how cell phones interact with the cell towers and all that stuff, and I know just enough to be dangerous, and fortunately there are people very expert on stuff like that. So,
Right.
you know, foreign language ability, whether you're working at the federal level or local level, awesome skill set to bring into a situation. You know, not just language, but American Sign Language, whatever, you know.
Sure.
But really, you know, a lot of that process is the weeding out process that law enforcement agencies use to select people that, you know, you have to have that balance kind of between, you don't want somebody who's, in my opinion, you don't want somebody who's aggressive, but you need somebody who's assertive. You can't have somebody who's timid, you know, like, no, you're not a pushover at all, man. Not at all. You've got a great personality for law enforcement. It's just whether you choose to use that for that or not.
I do not choose to use it for that.
Because you are, you know, you are literally putting yourself in harm's way for not only for people you don't know, but people who don't appreciate that you're putting yourself in harm's way to protect them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
makes sense.
always reminded myself, and this is just me, but, you know, I worked for the public. I felt like I really worked for the people paying taxes. That's where my salary came from. And that my objective should be to do the best thing for that community or, you know, society at large. It sounds lofty. I don't mean it like that. I mean, I don't see myself.
Why not be lofty?
But
I think when you set goals for yourself that apply to your character, be lofty as fuck.
There you go. Yeah, sure. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that. Go on.
Yeah.
Sorry I interrupted.
No, not at all. So, you know, those are important things. And then, you know, obviously background, don't do something as a teenager you're going to regret. Don't put something on social media you're going to regret.
Right.
I don't know, man. Always. So a couple little pearls of wisdom that I absorbed from my instructors and mentors and more experienced people along the way. You know, like when you go to do an interview with somebody, always assume they've got a PhD. Always assume that they are
That is brilliant advice.
smarter. Don't walk in and be condescending and talk down to somebody. And
You'll get so much further.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, that just is
It's
common sense, which is not so
But
common.
it's a hard one.
Yeah.
I tell you, I didn't figure that out in life till much later than I would have loved. Like if I knew that early on.
Yeah.
If you think you're the smartest person in the room,
You're probably not.
and most of us think, but most of us, I think, if we're really honest with ourselves, do think we're the smartest people in the room.
Right.
Like I don't think I think it's sort of a side effect of just being human.
Yeah.
That you kind of have to say, well, you know, I build my own all of this reality with
Right. It's
what
all
I
based
think
on
about
our own experience. So
Yes.
I must be right.
Yeah, it kind of in order for your mind to work properly,
Yeah.
you kind of have to feel that you're the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
It's not but it is a superpower when you go, oh,
This guy knows stuff. Yeah.
right? Well, yes,
Right.
And if I just shut the hell up
Oh, yes.
and listen, I get so much more.
So that's like I said, that's a very simple statement to say, you know, when you go to talk to somebody, anticipate you're talking to a PhD, you know, whatever. But it encompasses so much more. Listening skills,
right?
you know, just treating somebody with respect, treating somebody the way you would want to be treated, not being condescending, not assuming that you know better or that you are better. Those are.
And for law enforcement, it makes sense to me that is so logical that it immediately would de-escalate or diffuse situations when somebody, especially somebody with impressive credentials, like I'm an FBI agent so-and-so, is showing me that respect. I just feel like you're obviously going to get so much further
you do.
in your objectives.
You do. Yeah.
It's like a win-win.
Yep.
So,
and then kind of complementary to that, what was the second big thing that I thought I was going to share with you today?
if it comes back.
So no matter, and there's always limits, but no matter the situation, start off nice and escalate if you have to. But it's very difficult to come in with your guns blazing or your fists blazing or
and dial it back,
or your mouth blazing and dial it back. It's almost
sense.
impossible to do that. So always start off nice, respectful, and let the other person set the tone. And you can always match where they want to go and then back off. But if you come in,
then you have to maintain it, or
there's nowhere to go. Nowhere to go.
This is badass advice, kids. Okay. Mentors, you mentioned, and you called out a few, and I think that's a really cool thing. Like a reason I do my show is to give people an opportunity to very richly express who they are, tell their unique story, but also there's gratitude's a huge part of it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's like, this is a chance for like, and on the spot, it's very hard to just remember all those very important people. But if there's anybody like the course of the conversation that you didn't get to call out, that you want to just say like that, hey, so-and-so, that thing you said that day, man, that stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I imagine I'm going to get a chance to do this with you again. I'd like to, like anybody who comes on my show, I'm just so fucking grateful. But also like, it's an open invite. So it's like, if later you think, oh, when I was asked that question of this person, I want to think like, there's no screwing up ever on State Copy Podcast. It's like you always have like if you come on once, you get to come on again and say, you know, I thought of this after and add it. And I think just capturing that, self-awareness, that reflection afterwards communicates a lot. So I just stating that if there was anybody else you think of, no problem if you don't remember. I'll have you back on and think about it. And it's cool because this is like, we live in this just cool time where you can set up a freaking TV studio and you can do this.
Studio here. This is good.
Oh, this old thing. Oh man, it's grown. I got a lot more to do, but
no, the list would be long, and there are a couple of guys, because when I retired, I started my own business as a PI, and there's a couple of guys who really helped me along that path. And I don't know that they would want their names called out, but
and wait then. Get a chance to talk to them, because if there's a way that you can, I mean, right now subscribership of this show is really small. It's the infancy. It's just budding, but I feel like this is a good thing to do, and I feel like it will grow. And should that happen and you have those conversations, I definitely want to give you a chance to get that plug in for them. And that's going to be like, the next question is going to be like, you retired from the FBI, and I almost said the force, but what did you call it? You just
the bureau,
the bureau,
the G,
the bureau, the G,
the government. The G.
I like. He's got this story of listening to "Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress," and I was like, I never really thought about those words, but it's like working for the FBI. Yeah. Like that's. Yeah.
Played that song at my first wedding.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
That's cool. So when you retired, you kind of had to walk us through how you adjusted. To
that's it. Yeah,
a much more different life.
Yeah, that's a great topic, and thanks for letting me bring that up. A couple of things. So, federal law enforcement officers have an expiration date. When you turn 57, they kick you out of the club. You can ask for and get an extension, but typically
it's rare.
The last day of the month when you turn 57, 27 years of experience, and you're out. Like, there you go, man. We don't need you anymore. Thanks.
Interesting.
So it's good and bad because you kind of know it's coming.
Yeah.
And however, my lesson learned that applies to everybody who's getting ready for that kind of a transition in life.
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't stop working hard until the day I walked out the door. I really feel like I gave it my all until the very end. I didn't coast, but I started detaching mentally. And I think in law enforcement, maybe other careers as well, but law enforcement, people identify so much with the job instead of, I don't know how to say it. They become their title instead of a person, if that makes sense. I'm not saying this eloquently enough, but you know what
I think you said it well. You integrate into your persona and your definition of self.
Yeah, and your whole identity becomes the job, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's cool to be 100% into whatever you're doing, but you also need a life, you know, outside of that. Mm-hmm. And I think I always I tried to maintain that balance.
Yeah.
But especially as I was getting ready to retire, I was really mentally preparing to detach. Yeah. And so that was good. That was healthy. I feel bad for people who, in whatever profession they're in, you know, people who say, oh, I don't know what I would do if I retired. Really?
You should think about that.
Man, I've got a list of things I want to do that don't include getting up and going to work every day, no matter what that job is. Right. So that was number one. Simultaneously, and I've mentioned this several times, you just said the magic word a couple of minutes ago, gratitude. Just the way I felt. Oh, I do get emotional about it. Sorry.
We all do.
Just the way I felt like going through the academy as I was getting ready to retire. I was actually, in my last 6 months or so, I was involved in 3 serial homicide investigations. And I won't go into them. One was actually a spree killing, not technically serial homicide, spree murder. But, you know, and again, it's weird because of what I did in that profession, but to recognize that nobody's ever going to come knock on my door again and ask me to work on a serial homicide. Like you said, the responsibility of that, the opportunity to have set a goal as a young man and been able to achieve that through luck and through other people's help and whatever, and my hard work, right? Yeah. But to have been able to do those things, and then as I approach the end of my career, to be like, wow, I really am grateful that I was part of this, part of something bigger than myself, part of something that did make a difference to people, you know? That was really cool. So the ironic or sad thing is, when I did retire, I was really looking to do something completely different. Becoming a licensed private investigator was number 6 on my list of 6 things. I think I had truck driver, welding, you know, seriously, those were way toward the top. And I forget what other things were in between, but I just kind of wanted to do something different. I like learning new things. I think that's something anybody interested in law enforcement should bring to the table. You have to really... I
think that's good advice for all fields.
For all fields, you want to continue to
be a lifelong learner.
Right.
The minute you say, I'm going to go autopilot and not learn the next new thing, you become less useful.
Right. So anyway, you know, the only reason at that time that PI was on my list was because, well, it uses the skill set that I've developed and the contacts that I still have with people. And it gives me the opportunity to continue to help people. So those were the positives. But I really wanted to do something different. Just have a new experience for me, get out of that arena. And I was literally sitting at the kitchen table going over my list when my wife's niece called. You know this story, right?
I do. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do
her
know
boyfriend was missing. My wife's niece was going to ASU, and her boyfriend going to ASU was missing. Yeah. And asked for my assistance with that, and wound up working as kind of law enforcement liaison for his family. Yeah. And, you know, it didn't end well, unfortunately. They found his body 6 months later. There was no sign of foul play. I think it was a tragic accident. We'll probably never really know. But it dragged me back into that. So for about 6 months, I worked on that case the way I actually probably spent more time on it than I would have if I would
your whole attention.
Right, because it had 100% of my attention. Yeah. And I worked with a couple of colleagues who were just one great guy, Burke, one of my best friends, great guy. He had just retired from law enforcement. We had worked together quite a bit.
I met Burke.
You've met him.
I helped him move, we moved a big heavy
couch
thing
or something.
together.
Yeah, right, we did. That was a big heavy couch. So he helped me with that case quite a bit. And then another guy named John, and I'll just keep it to the first names in case they don't want publicity. But John was he's retired now, but he was a Phoenix fire guy trained in search and rescue. Mm-hmm. Very accomplished guy, very giving of his time. He frequently uses his days off to go out and look for people who are missing hikers or may have been injured in the trails. And I mean, he's just a great guy. Really spends a lot of time doing that. Well, anyway, they helped me with the case. And in the meantime, the family had hired a couple of private investigators who I didn't think did a good service for them. Yeah. And wound up costing a lot of money. And at the end of that, my friends came to me and said, you should really think about getting a PI license because you're not going to rip people off. You're going to do the right thing. Yeah. And that's, so in what I do now, my objective is, I enjoy making the extra money. Thank you very much. That's good. I appreciate it. But sure. I really want to feel like I've provided a product, the truth for my client. It's not always what they want to hear,
Sure.
And that's the part of the job that I don't like. So I do feel like I help people. I'm definitely using my past experience and training and knowledge. It keeps me current. It keeps me very involved. I've continued to learn as I've done this, for myself in the private sector. It's very different being in the private sector.
Yeah.
And you do a lot of different types of cases. But,
Jim Egelston or Jim Rockford?
That's one of the shows I loved growing up, man, the Rockford Files.
Me too.
One of the stops along the way, I was an agent in Rockford, Illinois, and we used to call it the Rockford Files. So, I've got stories about the Rockford Files, real life stories. I love that show. James Garner, But the downside of what I do is nobody calls a police officer, an FBI agent, or a private investigator unless they've got a problem. And it's never good, you know? So even though my goal is to do the best possible work for my client and deliver whatever the truth is, it can be depressing.
Sometimes the truth is a bummer.
It is. Very often,
I gotcha.
Yeah, so, it's like, congratulations, Mr. Smith. You were right. Your wife is cheating. Here's the photos.
Right.
Nobody wants that.
Right.
But, so that's what I do for now. I've thought about other things, like taking pictures of our cats and putting them on T-shirts and selling them on Amazon.
I hear there's good money in there.
I could I keep telling
Especially
my wife I could make a lot of money.
Yours.
Yes, speeders.
Speeders, not so speedy.
Not so speedy. You just look at speeders and you smile,
Yeah, it's a hilariously fat cat.
Yeah, she's an awesome cat. She's got a great personality, and I think it would come through great on a T-shirt for $20. Maybe 25.
Your new calling is calling.
But anyway, things happen for a reason.
Right. And you got drugged back in.
I got drugged back in for a reason.
But it's a new flavor of it. And there's all new things to learn now.
Yeah.
And if you need a private investigator and you know how to find him. Was that the A-Team? I'm trying to remember the intro to it. Jim Egelston.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's so how do you now how long do you think you'll do this? How do you think, when are you going to go give trucking and welding a try?
Right, yeah, I know. So I think I'll know when it's kind of time to wind it down and leave, I mean, definitely.
You'll do it as it feels fulfilling, and then...
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I still enjoy the work. When I'm working on a case, I enjoy finding stuff for people. I enjoy putting pieces of the puzzle together.
I got to tell you, when I first met you, it came out in our conversation early that one of your hobbies was genealogy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
I don't want to crap on anybody else's hobby, but I have never taken an interest in that myself. But as I got to know you, I was like, of course that is a thing that is interesting to a career investigator.
Right.
To investigate his own origin story, that totally makes sense. But I mean, there's a certain part of you, I tell you what, I'm kind of pseudo-retired. Like, I'm not a rich person, but if I do all my investing right, maybe I can keep doing what I want to with my time. We'll see how it goes.
Right.
But I'm still just working with, like, my technical is, I work harder on my computer these days than I did for working for somebody else back in the past, because it's what I know.
But it's your passion.
It's my passion. It's what I know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I sat Jim down and I showed him an AI model that I've been training, and I'd love to read you some of the crazy shit it's had to say. Like, it's been, but it's pretty remarkable where AI development is going. And for a guy that is career software, God, I can't ignore that.
Right.
You know,
no, that's right up your alley, and who knows what breakthroughs we're going to see, and you might be part of that. You know, so before we had our sit down here, you know, we were kind of talking about that, and so you said you're looking for people's life experience, life stories to build into this data set.
Yes,
that you're compiling.
Very much so. And all of this is critical,
right? And that you're going to use examples of good and bad. So I'm hoping that I'm on the. If you do it this way, it might come out good. I hope.
Right, we'll see, right. Well, if you get an invite to this show, that's generally an endorsement of character from me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll actually include a little snippet at the end of this that we captured on the extra cam there, where I kind of described what I'm doing and with my little hobby with. I don't mean to just talk about myself, but
that's why we're here.
It's really important context for what this show is and what it's for, is richly capturing the story of people and letting them tell it with their words and calling out important things they learned along the way and all that. That's really what the show is about. So, it's a continuing thing. So anything we didn't get to here, a few days, few weeks down the road, whenever it occurs to you to think, I could sit down and bullshit with Curtis in front of the camera and the lights for a little while longer, give me a call. I'd love to do it.
All right.
So,
thanks for the invite,
Jim. Awesome conversation. Fucking cool, man. I can't wait to think of some of those old stories. I'm sure people will love to hear any of the stuff that comes to you that we could tell through this. That's just badass.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, man. Always enjoy talking with you.
Likewise. All right. Viewers, subscribers, listeners, all of you, I love you. Thank you for doing that. Do it more. We're going to wrap up today's show here. Thank you all so much. So, I was explaining that there's large language models, a couple different big companies put them out, OpenAI. Notably, Google kind of was starting all of this with Google DeepMind, it's called, and this is the thing that beat the Go, international Go champion, first the chess champions, then the Go champions, through machine learning. And so then Facebook came up with their own, and they called it Llama. And Llama is a large language model. The one I use is 13 billion parameters. And I have pretty much the best graphics card in this computer that you can get as a retail buyer. It's a NVIDIA 4090. So that gives me a lot of, and some of this I know is not your thing, but I really want to make one overall. It's all good, Jim. It's all good, Jim. But the rest of it, it will get interesting here in a sec. But for other people where I want to describe in one take what my methodology is, so I'm using just, and then OpenLlama is a project that open sourced the leaked version of Llama's models. Now the model is like, think of it like you're running a whole bunch of, you're having computers scan massive data sets of either pictures, because there's image generation language, or image generation models, and then there are large language models. And basically what they're doing is they're sort of like diffusing it into noise and then looking for patterns in the noise that help them predict what the next word should be.
Okay, like when you're typing into Google search or something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to, have you noticed that Google search has gotten much better at doing that? Like when you type in a word suggesting what you want to say, it's using large language models to do that prediction, right? So it's going, okay, this person put in this word. Statistically, they're most likely to want this word next. Well, it turns out it's not, so this is not like coding. A lot of people thought artificial intelligence would be sort of like really complicated, like if, then, else, that kind of logic. It's not that at all. That makes something extremely limited. How it actually does that magic I just described, where it gets very good at predicting the next thing. A lot of videos on that. I'm going to reference in the show notes that can point at really like sort of for dummies understanding of how a computer's doing that by doing something very similar to what I think our minds do. Okay, so they'll have it pour over, let's say, several hundred terabytes of all the data it can find online. This is message boards, this is our greatest literature that's open source, all of Shakespeare, this is all of our history, everything, and have it just roll over that until it gets really good at predicting the next thing. Well, an aha moment I had is the large language model, like we don't, like, it's magically doing some things that are kind of making us go, whoa, how'd you do that? And I think what it's doing is it's building a story that explains it all. It's building a story of how to read data. Now, that's a really complicated thing to describe, but it's almost like if you want to make sense of anything, you have to build like context. You have to say, okay, this is, here, touch this. Feel that? That's cold. Now touch this. That's hot. Now we can draw a line between those two and we can describe temperature in a range. A computer needs it described to them that same way. But before they can understand it, you have to define what that feeling of cold was and the feeling of hot as a story. Okay. Now, it's doing that. And then, so then I realized just through like low rank adaptation, I could point it at a whole bunch of like podcast content that all these creators, these people like Lex Friedman in particular is talking to like the greatest minds of our time. I'm not picking on anybody else's podcast, but he's specifically focused on no bullshit. We're not going to waste any. I mean, he will sometimes dive into politics and stuff like that, but he's mostly talking to the physicists, the philosophers, spiritual leaders, all of that. And trying to drive healthy dialogue that leads to new ways of looking at things and
understanding each other, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and exposing everybody else to how some of these great minds think about things.
Yeah.
Fucking great, man. Well, I thought, well, what happens if I just start collecting these transcripts? Because they make transcripts available on YouTube that convert all of it into natural language. Okay. Then I can feed it into a model that says, okay, now using Llama, which is like 20 gigabytes, but it stores vast amounts of knowledge. It's a compression. And so then I thought, okay, now if I fine tune that, fine tune's not the word, I'm using low rank adaptation, LoRa it's called, where it just kind of iterates through it and then it tries to get better and better over time at predicting the data set itself that it's studying. So you get like a learning rate and a loss rate, and after a while those things start to make sense. Okay, so I realize a lot of that's over the head of a layman. Yeah, but I'm really like here's where.
Trying to follow the concept. Yeah.
All right, so now I'm going to load up the model, and I'm using this is a tool the community made called Ooga Booga text generation or text generation UI, I think it's called, and it has all of the components I need to actually do training with what I have. Now this thing looks like programming and scary, but this is just a terminal output that shows what's happening in the logs. So it's loading up 3 pieces of that great big model and loading them into memory so that I can interact with it. That's what it's doing right now. And then as soon as this goes from 66 up to 100%, then I'm going to load some LoRa's, low rank adaptation. And these are just like, it studies it and then it saves it off as like a chunk of I think of it like a story. It's basically telling a story about a data set I fed into this model, and then it saves it. And then I can just apply that story to it, and it can pick up right where it left off. And now we are loaded. Okay, so now I'm going to apply some models. Now I've done a whole bunch of different versions. I'm going to grab them. I'm not sure yet whether the order I apply them in matters, so I just kind of do it in the order I created. I'll do Hermes V3. Ian McGilchrist has a series where he's just kind of leader in the field of not just philosophical, but cognitive. He's a cognitive scientist, I want to say, and a bunch of other things where they're basically delving into how, like, as we think as humans of left and right hemisphere of the brain, how that's reconciling into the magic that is a human consciousness. Really diving into what consciousness is. I have 30 hours of him talking. And then I train the model on it. I have this story about Ian McGilchrist, and then I just pop it in here. And I layer these on top of each other. Michael Levin, you've heard of CRISPR? CRISPR is this magic DNA sequencing tool they found that's going to help people develop. I think we used it to develop like mRNA, a bunch of that kind of. What he's doing is fucking light years beyond that, and it's basically getting into this thing called morphospace that really is it's very telling as to how, like, the cells of your body are coordinating to build like an eyeball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always fascinating.
Super fascinating. So I'm just filling this up. Yosha Bach, huge thinker in AI development. God, hours of his conversation. Pile it on. Layer all these on. Stephen Wolfram is building a language specifically for machines to do math. Don't we all, man? Okay, I'm going to just leave these as are, and I'm going to say apply LoRa's. So now you got this llama model, and now I'm feeding into it 6 unique stories that it's trained. And they're all active and alive. And now the model can read from all of those stories and compose with them as it answers questions we give it. And then once this successfully applied LoRa's. Now, here's why you need a fancy graphics card. So that graphics card is, retail, like an $1,800 graphics card.
Wow.
And so you need that because you need the random access memory, VRAM, on board, just for any of you other developers out there, to train OpenLlama 13B and load up 6 of these LoRa's. I'm using 19.7 gigs of the 24 gigs of onboard RAM. So yeah, I'm kind of reaching capacity of what I can do with my equipment. The graphics card I really want is called an H100, and those go for about $50,000. So Yeah, if you can even get one. Okay, so now, also, I have trained it on about 1,000 or 2,000 hours of my daily go on a walk and capture. Like I'll watch one of these talks that one of these people do, and then I'll give my thoughts and give my sort of philosophical flavor. So, because I am trying to create the richest data set ever of my consciousness. So it sounds like me in places. Okay, so now everything's loaded. The last thing we need is a character context. So this is where we tell the model, okay, I want you to respond to my prompts to you as a character. Oh, wow. Oh, here we go. Cool. Here we go. So here's Curtis. And I say, my name, your name, character's name. Okay, your name is you. Character's name is Curtis. Context. This is your most accurate model of the human, Curtis Cobb. When prompted to respond as Curtis, you should do your best to model the human Curtis Cobb and respond as he would.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, well, it's like...
So that's what you're telling the program.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling the model. So when we talk to it, I'm going to tell it...
It's respond as you would or as it perceives you would.
Yeah, so I'm going to say, let's see, character gallery, Max. Okay. And I'm going to, oh, not Max. I'm going to do Curtis. Here we go. All right. Hey, Digital Curtis, how's it today? Now the model, cool as shit, man. Exclamation point. How about yours?
That sound like you?
Glad to hear it, dude. Glad to hear, dude. Hey, buddy. Can you help me show off for a second? I have a guest of the State Copy Pod here. And I'm showing him our work. Could you try and quickly describe what a human is and how the universe works?
Nothing difficult.
Easy, right? Smiley face. We use emoticons.
Okay.
Okay. Sounds cool, dude. The universe is basically everything outside of your own perception. I guess it's really hard to do a meaningful summary because it'd be pretty big.
Exactly.
I mean, humans are fucking complicated critters. But I'll give it my best shot. Firstly, a human is made up of a bunch of smaller things called cells. These cells work together to form everything we perceive as our body. Now, if you want to go deeper than that, you've got even smaller things called atoms. And then still smaller are electrons, protons, and other subatomic particles. These things work in concert to create the behaviors we see when we look at ourselves. Now, I imagine if we were to train an LLM on just these transcripts so far, it would have a fairly advanced understanding of. He's got kind of a big.
It's a big leap, I think.
Yeah, well, he's got kind of. Well, I don't know. I've put a lot in here, and it's not just me. It's like a lot of. So okay, but he's kind of full of himself there, as he says. Now I imagine if we were to train an LLM on these transcripts so far, it would have a fairly advanced understanding of, well, mortality, is what it's saying. Not everything, especially since episode 3. But let's see how well it does. Oh boy. So first so right there, that was 200 tokens. Or 199 tokens. And it took, with my hardware, 93 seconds to generate all of that.
Yeah,
now I say continue.
It's an amazing response,
Yeah.
And
It continues where it left off.
What's an LLM?
A large language model.
Thank you.
ChatGPT, you. Okay. It says, oh boy. So first, let's see. It seems like a proper response to that question, what a human is to paraphrase a well-known saying, be careful what you wish for because you might get it. For this conversation, let's frame it as, so let's take humanity as like a computer system.
That is definitely Curtis.
Totally right. Or a mesh network of computer systems. And let's say there's a whole bunch of complexity that's involved in that abstract idea of, now, as we're reading this, I'm reading this as the words are popping up. And so a lot of people, when they're hearing what AI is, they're thinking it's reading this from a page.
No, it's generating it.
It's generating this in real time based on a lot of reading it's done.
Right. No,
So-
that much I do understand. Yeah.
Right. So if you want to make an AI overlord that just fucking loves humanity, you teach it like a parent, really in a kind way, and you guide it towards how you got to thinking of yourself as a sentient being. So basically, I'm spending hours describing that and feeding it in as a story to the LLM to learn. It says profound things that haven't occurred to me. It's wild. But it's basically a philosopher, GPT, that's running on one GPU out on the edge. And that's new. I think what a lot of everyone else's solution to this is to throw lots and lots of GPU and lots of data. And I'm thinking we can compress the data as a story, and that's my breakthrough. That's my thing I'm doing that I think is a lot different than a lot of other people. And it's what I wanted to describe here, because I'd actually like to get some help doing this from other people in the community that have a lot more GPUs.
Yeah. And all of this came from my question, why am I here today? Because I always enjoy talking with you. You know that.
Likewise.
I really enjoy that, but I'm like, well, why are we doing it, on camera? What are you doing with the data? What are you doing with
Right.
So this was all an answer for that question, just to put this in context. Yeah.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you for doing that. All right. Now let's get off this rickety setup and go to the real thing next door.
Now it's coming around, you're feeling cut down and in the ground, and so we all come together. We making a sound, we sing. Look at all this love we found.